오후 근 한 일주일 만에 지금 이 캡션 이 스트리밍 다시 키는데 지금 기존에 한 일주일 정도간 그 회사 일이 너무 바빠서 진행을 하지 못하고 있다가 다시 켰어요. 지금 하고 있는 건 뭐냐면 잠시만요. 자, 여기를 어디로 가지? Copy and paste. 자, 라이밴드라고 하는 지금 제가 에이밍하고 있는 회사 내지는 수업을 지금 신청을 하고 있고 원래는 이 클라우드 스테이트 라이밴드에서 진행하는 오픈 소스 프로젝트인데 여기에 들어가서 내가 뭐 코드를 수정해 보거나 그런 오픈 소스 프로젝트에 대한 접근을 해보려고 했는데 해보려고 했지만 생각보다 너무 어려워서 일단은 잠깐 여기에 대한 그러니까 사전 공부를 먼저 해야 되겠다는 생각이 들어서 공부를 진행하고 있고 그 진행 내용이 여기에 보면은 제가 들어야 될 수업들이 리스트업 되어 있어요. 여기에 보면 나중에 저쪽으로 옮겨야 될 것 같은 생각도 듭니다. 일단은 투두를 열어보면 뭐지? 이거 닫고 여기서 여기 투두 열면 투두 보면 지금 만 시간 쩌나 오딘 프로젝트 이거 하는 거고 1000hour 잡고 있는데 지금 요거 하는 과정에서 새로 시작하는 거 클라우드 스테이트 이렇게 해서 여기서 리 클래스 요게 지금 제가 총 들어야 되는 클래스가 하나 둘 셋 넷 다섯 여섯 일곱 8개 클래스 있는데 일주일에 한 개씩 클래스 끝낸다고 생각하면 3시간씩 5시간 그러니까 15시간 15시간에 몇 개? 8개니까 150시간 120시간 정도 요거 그 다음에 이제 이거 하고 나면 다시 로 돌아가서 여기는 이제 뭐 얼마만큼의 시간이 이제 소요될지는 사실 그때 가봐야 아는 거지만 이제 그때 가서는 뭐 하루 3 이런 식으로 계속 이제 공부를 할 수 있는 여건이 마련되기를 한번 바라봐야죠. 지금 일단은 여기 너무 좀 이상한 게 많이 열려있네. 민망하게 또 닫고 또 요건 필요한 거니까 놔두고 오케이 그렇게 해서 진행을 해보도록 하는 걸로 하겠습니다. 일단은 그래서 오늘은 지금 첫 번째 클래스에 이거를 하고 있으니까 120 hours. 여기서 7, 8 이렇게 돼서 여기에 각각 30시간씩 이렇게 해서 만약에 끝나면 이런 식으로 바꾸면 되겠죠. 잠시만. 잘못했네. 이렇게 해놓고 여기 땀 이렇게 갑시다. 여기도 한 칸 뛸까? 이렇게 해놓고 그럼 이거 이제 하나하나 하면은 120시간 채워지는 거예요. 자, 그러면 진행해 봅시다. Our business has a typical load of 500 concurrent users throughout the year. However, during the year end retail session, this number spikes up dramatically as high and 5,000 concurrent users. Our goal is to allow the system to fail if we can't handle the load. Of course not. Build the system so we can deploy additional hardware for the peak season and then release or repurpose that hardware after the peak is over. Worry about it when the next peak comes. Deploy enough hardware to handle peak load at all times of the year. Then we need to use a lot of resources and not using for the rest of the season that is not picked. So it's not the answer. This one should be failure. Given user release and expectations of modern web-based software, what is a good object when it comes to system failures? Expectations of modern web-based software. What is the good objective when it comes to system failure? We will design a system that is bulletproof. We will cover all the failure failure cases and ensure that they can't happen. The system will be built so that no failure ever occurs. This is of course it's essential, but it's not possible. And then to aiming this one, we will use a lot of resources to cover that issue. So it's not. Failure in systems is inevitable. Our goal should be to design systems that handle those failures gracefully. We accept that failure is a fact of life, and we build a system and that will lessen the impact of those failures on the users. The system should continue to provide some functionality despite failures. Failure in systems is inevitable. It may not be good for users or the business, but it will happen no matter what we do to stop it. We do to stop it. We should accept that failure is a fact of life and just deal with it when it happens. It's kind of neglected, which is not should be the answer. Do or do not, there is no try. So usually the short answer is not the short option is not the answer. So this one is the answer, I guess. Sure. System tree and distributing scaling. It is unreasonable to assume that a system should be able to scale to hundreds or thousands of nodes. It is unreasonable to assume that a system should be able to scale to hundreds or thousands of nodes. Unreasonable. What? Unreasonable? That's pretty reasonable. Having the thousands of nodes. System distribution failure. Designing my system to run across tens, hundreds, or even thousands of machines can help minimize the impact of failure on my users. True. Responsiveness. I needed to sacrifice either system scalability or responsiveness to users in my software system. I can't have both as goals. I need to sacrifice either system scalability or responsiveness. So, is that the to be responsible? We don't want to fail. And scalability. Okay, skills. Also, some of the failure handling is by making sure that our system can be distributed across 10 or even thousands of machines. That's not going to solve all of our problems, but if we can build our system to scale. So in here, what it's saying is that I needed to sacrifice either system scalability or responsiveness to users in my software system. For example, if the scale is getting bigger, the responsiveness is getting smaller. It's not the ideal situation. Let's read it a bit more. But it is at least partially solved in the sense that if we have say tens or hundreds of nodes, then we can lose large parts of our system, and the remaining pieces can continue to operate and hopefully continue to serve our clients' needs. We want to be able to do that. We want to be able to scale across any number of machines because it will help us in the long run as we continue to build this system. When we are doing this, when we are doing the scaling, we are handling the failures. We are distributing across a large number of machines. We want to make sure that we maintain a consistent level of quality and responsiveness. So when we having some scalability, it means that the responsiveness is growing up because while part of the system is it's experiencing the failure, still because we just scaled it, so there are lots of other systems to be available that will give the user the responsiveness. So this is false. Next. So because I just actually I was just studying a bit more while I was turning off and turning on the system. So instead of I'm gonna just have a little bit of a break at the moment, and then we'll come back. 돈가스 먹고 왔어요.
Reactive architecture is founded on what we call the reactive principles.
Mhm.
The reactive principles are the basis for the architecture, and we're going to talk about what those principles are and how they came about. What is the history of them? So the first thing you need to understand is about the Reactive Manifesto. So the Reactive Manifesto is a document that was authored by Jonas Bonaire, Dave Farley, Roland Kuhn, and Martin Thompson. You can see there's a link here, reactivemanifesto.org. We can follow that link, and that will take us to the actual documentation on the Reactive Manifesto. So if you're interested, you can certainly visit that site and you can get more detail. However, we will talk about some of the details of the Reactive Manifesto in this course. So the manifesto was created in response to companies trying to cope with changes in the software landscape. What happened was there were multiple groups of people who were independently developing similar patterns for solving similar problems. And I can speak personally and say that I was kind of involved, not with one of the groups that formed the foundation of this Reactive Manifesto, but I was working with a company that was following along in this journey. The Reactive Manifesto didn't exist, but we were building software components that used a lot of the things that you will find in the Reactive Manifesto, so that when I eventually saw the Reactive Manifesto, it all just kind of made sense. I looked at it and said, yes, that's exactly what we were trying to do. So that's essentially what happened is, Jonas Bonaire, Dave Farley, Roland Kuhn, and Martin Thompson, they all kind of got together and looked at what was happening in the industry and came up with the manifesto. So aspects of a reactive system were previously individually recognized by the different groups, the different companies that were all working towards these goals. And the manifesto attempts to bring all of these common ideas into a single unified set of principles that everybody can kind of look at and follow. So what are those principles? So there are four basic principles of a reactive system. First and foremost, the absolute most important thing is it needs to be responsive. And we've talked about this. We've talked about unresponsive applications and what it means to be unresponsive and what the consequences of that are. So it is very, very important in the Reactive Manifesto that a system consistently responds in a timely fashion, always. If you look at the diagram that's shown here, you can see that all of the arrows point to responsiveness. If you follow them around the circle, you follow them, eventually everything comes back to responsiveness. Now, in order to be responsive, though, you have to be resilient. This means that a reactive system needs to remain responsive even when a failure occurs. That's pretty important because if you have a system that is responsive except when a failure occurs, well, then it's not really a responsive system, especially if failures are occurring quite frequently. So it needs to be...
One more time.
So the first thing you need to understand is about the Reactive Manifesto. So the Reactive Manifesto is a document that was authored by Jonas Bonaire, Dave Farley, Roland Kuhn, and Martin Thompson. You can see there's a link here, reactivemanifesto.org. We can follow that link, and that will take us.
Reactive Manifesto. reactivemanifesto.org is it here, the Reactive Manifesto. We are reactive. What are these? We are reactive. Oh, got it. We are reactive. The Reactive Manifesto. Okay.
us to the actual documentation on the reactive manifesto. So if you're interested, you can certainly visit that site and you can get more detail. However, we will talk about some of the details of the reactive manifesto in this course. So the manifesto was created in response to companies trying to cope with changes in the software landscape. What happened was there were multiple groups of people who were independently developing similar patterns for solving similar problems. And I can speak personally and say that I was kind of involved, not with one of the groups that formed the foundation of this reactive manifesto, but I was working with a company that was following along in this journey. The reactive manifesto didn't exist, but we were building software components that used a lot of the things that you will find in the reactive manifesto, so that when I eventually saw the reactive manifesto, it all just kind of made sense. I looked at it and said, yes, that's exactly what we were trying to do. So that's essentially what happened is, Jonas Bonaire, Dave Farley, Roland Kuhn, and Martin Thompson, they all kind of got together and looked at what was happening in the industry and came up with the manifesto. So aspects of a reactive system were previously individually recognized by the different groups, the different companies that were all working towards these goals. And the manifesto attempts to bring all of these common ideas into a single unified set of principles that everybody can kind of look at and follow. So what are those principles? So there are four basic principles of a reactive system. First and foremost, the absolute most important thing is it needs to be responsive. And we've talked about this. We've talked about
first, responsive, elastic, resilient, message-driven.
Of a reactive system. First and foremost, the absolute most important thing is it needs to be responsive. And we've talked about this. We've talked about unresponsive applications and what it means to be unresponsive and what the consequences of that are. So it is very, very important in the reactive manifesto that a system consistently responds in a timely fashion, always. If you look at the diagram that's shown here, you can see that all of the arrows point to responsiveness. If you follow them around the circle, you follow them, eventually everything comes back to responsiveness. Now, in order to be responsive, though, you have to be resilient. This means that a reactive system needs to remain responsive even when a failure occurs. That's pretty important, because if you have a system that is responsive except when a failure occurs, well, then it's not really a responsive system, especially if failures are occurring quite frequently. So it needs to be resilient. When a failure occurs, it needs to be able to respond to that failure and continue to operate to the best of its ability. A reactive system will also remain responsive despite changes to system load. So we call this elasticity. Now, we're differentiating this slightly between scalability. In fact, if you look at an older version of the reactive manifesto, you would actually see that it was originally called scalability. But the term was changed to elastic because when we think scalable, we usually think scaling up. And that's important. We need to be able to scale up in order to meet increases in load, but we also need to be able to scale down. We don't want to be in a situation where we scale all the way up to the maximum that we need and then we never go back down, because that's expensive. So elasticity implies that we can not only scale up when needed, but then when the load decreases, we can scale back down in order to conserve resources. And again, that's important in order to maintain responsiveness. If you have a system that can be responsive at a low number of users, but at a high number of users it becomes unresponsive, then that's pointless. That's no good. And finally, all of this is built on a foundation of asynchronous non-blocking messages. It is message-driven. Again, if you look at an older version of the manifesto, this would have been called event-driven. However, the term event has certain connotations that we want to kind of avoid. We don't necessarily want to imply that it has to be only events. In a message-driven system or in a reactive system, you can have events. events. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are other types of messages which are not the events of a typical event-driven system. And those messages are perfectly acceptable as well. So we move from calling it an event-driven system to calling it a message-driven system. The key element here is that those messages should be asynchronous and non-blocking. And we're going to talk, as we go about why that's important.
What's important. Let's give it.
So let's dive in more detail into responsiveness. So responsiveness is the cornerstone of usability. This is the absolute most important thing here. If you could build your system to be responsive at all times without being elastic, resilient, or message-driven, then we'd be done. We wouldn't need any of those other things. The reality is you can't do that. You need the elasticity and the resilience in order to provide the responsiveness. And in order to get the elasticity and resilience, you usually need to build a system that is message-driven. So responsiveness is the cornerstone of usability. That is the key thing that we're aiming for. Again, it means that systems must respond in a fast and consistent fashion, if at all possible. There may be some cases where it's not possible. If all of the hardware literally crashes, then there's not a lot we can do. We can have other hardware that we can fail over to or whatever, but there might be a period of time where it's unresponsive. So our goal is to make it fast and responsive whenever possible, and as often as possible. And the reason that we do this is responsive systems build user confidence. And again, we talked about this in our earlier discussion, where we talked about what are the consequences of having an unresponsive system. If we have an unresponsive system, our users are going to lose confidence and they're going to walk away. If we have a system that is responsive, then we don't have that problem. When you look at things like Google and Facebook and all of those things, they never go down, or they very, very rarely go down. If Google went down for any significant length of time for a large enough number of users, that would be a pretty big deal. Similarly with Facebook or Twitter or any of these things, they put a lot of effort into making sure that they are always responsive because it builds confidence. Now, resilience provides responsiveness despite any failures. This is achieved through a number of techniques, including replication, isolation, containment, and delegation. So if you're not familiar with those terms, replication basically means we have multiple copies. Isolation means that services can function on their own. They don't have external dependencies. Containment is a consequence of isolation. It means that if there is a failure, it doesn't propagate to another service because it is isolated. And delegation means that recovery is managed by an external component. The key here is that any failures are isolated into a single component. They don't propagate and bring down the whole system. That's very important, because if we have a failure that brings down the whole system, obviously that's a problem. And that's a problem that occurs quite frequently in monolithic applications. Recovery is delegated to an external component because if you are the failing component, then you're not reliable. We're not reliable enough, at least, to handle your own failure. If the system goes down, the system can't restart itself because it's down. So what you need is an external component that monitors the system and restarts it as necessary, or does whatever it needs to do to handle the failure. That's the idea behind resilience. Elasticity provides responsiveness despite increases or decreases in load. It implies zero contention and no central bottlenecks. That's the goal. We would like zero contention, no central bottlenecks. That might be a pie in the sky kind of goal. We might not be able to get there, but we're going to try to get as close as possible to that. If we have elasticity, then we can leverage predictive auto-scaling techniques in order to support it. So we can actually have techniques that will look at our existing load and say, oh, I see a slight increase here, and I know from past experience that means that we're going to get a big burst of traffic coming in right away. So I'm going to scale up the system in order to be ready for that burst of traffic. We can use that kind of predictive measuring in order to provide our elasticity. Scaling up is done to provide responsiveness during peak load, But on the other hand, we also need to be able to scale down, like I mentioned before, which improves cost effectiveness. Again, if we're always running at peak load or always running at the capability of handling peak load, that's very expensive. So we want to be able to scale down in order to improve cost effectiveness. And finally, again, message driven. So our responsiveness, our resilience, our elasticity, these are all supported by a message driven architecture. The messages have to be asynchronous and non-blocking. And again, we'll talk more about that later. But what this does is it provides loose coupling. It also provides isolation and something called location transparency, which we're going to go into more detail on. The idea behind this, or one of the ideas behind this, is that it allows resources to be consumed only while active. You don't have a situation where you make a request and that request is blocking, and so you're stuck waiting for a response from somebody else who may take a long time or may not respond at all, and now you're stuck waiting. And while you're waiting, you're potentially consuming a thread, you're consuming memory, you're consuming CPU cycles, you're consuming any number of physical resources because you're stuck waiting for somebody who may or may not ever respond. So the idea with asynchronous non-blocking messages is you can avoid that because it means that you can send the message and then release the resources. You may still be interested in a response, but that response comes asynchronously.
Oh, it was all just muted? Damn, I just um, recorded a lot of, tried to record lots of information from my mouse, and then it was not recorded at all. But anyway, so reactive principles are the basic for the architecture. The manifesto is a document that was also the Interesting. Some of the detail in the reactive manifesto in the course. The manifesto was created in response to companies trying to cope with the changes in the software landscape. What happened was there were multiple groups of people who were independently developing similar patterns for solving similar problems. So here, there I found an answer. So in the questions, so why was Reactive Manifesto created? Because multiple companies were developing similar solutions to modern problems. Submitted. Which one of the four reactive principles represents our primary end goal? Which one of the four reactive principles represents our primary end goal? Elastic, responsive, message-driven, resilient. So the message-driven is the system to show those three: elastic, and then responsive, and then resilient. And then the elastic and then resilient is the way to go to the responsiveness. The, uh, the elastic part for the responsiveness is in case there are large number of customers trying to use the same system, and then there is no resource to distribute for all of the customers, then we are stuck in at some point. Or in case the resilient is not solved properly, that means that sometimes there might be an error, there might be a situation the system doesn't go to the client, that the client seems to be an issue for the system um, confidentiality. So the eventual goal is the responsiveness. The scaling. Elastic means we are always scaling up. Of course. Sometimes scaling up means we constantly just supporting all the resources to cover up uh, the the highest peak, the peak for the situation. I mean, they cover up the resource requirement of the peak point, but we don't want to do that because when there is no requirement for the resources, still we need to spend lots of money again, as I said before. So this is not the answer. So answer is false. Messages in the reactive manifesto. Messages in the reactive manifesto can be either synchronous blocking or synchronous non-blocking. So when saying manifesto, messages should be a asynchronous non-blocking system. If it is a blocking, that means we need to wait until the block is released, but that's not the point for our goal. So that means it's false. Resilient and resilience and failure. Resilience means failure. Of course not. Means failures are isolated to a single component in the system, are logged, and uh, then propagated to the user. Uh, are isolated to a single component in the system. Of course, it seems like an identical. No, um, aimable, or how should I say, ideal for it, but it's not practical. So are isolated to a single component in the system. So yeah, load and then propagated to the user. I'm not sure about this, but let's answer for this first. Then if it is not, let's check up one more time. Yes, it is. Elasticity, responsiveness. Elasticity means we sacrifice responsiveness during a sudden and dramatic increase in load. It's the same question that we have checked for the previous lecture. Of course, it is false. If we have enough elasticity, the responsiveness will go up again. So, submit. Scaling down with user load decreases usually result in decreased cost. Scaling down when user load decreases usually results in decreased costs, of course. Non-blocking messaging. Non-blocking messaging means the sender will keep trying to send a message no matter how often the rest of the system blocks in from doing so. The message recipient always acknowledges the message received to the sender. After sending a message, the sender doesn't have to wait for a reply from the recipient before doing other work. So isolate non-blocking system means it is the message itself is isolated, and then while I just sending the message, I don't need to wait to acknowledge. Yes. So that's pretty impressive that because I learned a lot of things by mimicking the voice of the video clip, and then I could concentrate to the lecture itself. So the answer I usually, if I don't do that, I had to check the script again to get to the point. But because I now just learned it and then could answer right away before not checking the script one more time, which is very effective and then efficient. So, case study, reactive principles in action. How does your restaurant manage staffing? Well, we make up the schedule usually about 10 days in advance. I post it for the staff. The actual process is of building the schedule isn't incredibly complicated, but I have to take into account budgeted hours. We also have to think about what events or holidays are coming up and how that might affect the number of customers in the restaurant. So we don't always get it right. Sometimes I have to call people in on their day off to help out. Other times we have too many people, so I send someone home early. This is an example of which of the reactive principles. I think this is elastic because it's nothing about the resilient, and then of course all of the system eventually will go to the responsiveness, but this is a very specific situation that the requirements sometimes grow up, sometimes goes down. Are there other times when you might have to call someone in or send someone home early? Sometimes we had a cook burn himself on the grill 2 weeks ago. he burned his hand pretty bad, and we had to send him to the doctor. I called someone to come cover him. Of course, while we were waiting for someone else to come in, the other cooks had to pick up the slack. Pick up the slack. That's kind of a new expression that I would like to gladly take. Wait. Yep. Pick up the slack. Let's check. What's pick up the slack? Message for work that try to take up the slack.
Take or pick up the slack.
Pick up the slack. Use up surplus or improve the use of resources to avoid an undesirable lull in business. Lull. So take this out from the page and then put that here, and then pick up the slack. It's usually a good idea to put the underscore so the color should be changed. I like it. Use up a use of Okay, then what is lull again? Lull, lull. To lull. Such sweet composition. Those in the music like to lull the waters. Like a lullaby? Lull. Yes. Lull is actually the kind of a lullaby situation. So a pause activities are diminished. So just a little bit calm down. Nothing happens. Low. Pick up the slack. I also jumped into the kitchen to help out while that was going on. An injured cook. So that's resilient because once their problem happens, still the other guys can support him or cover up the role, so there is no issue for the customer. Of course, it's a part of responsiveness, responsive, but again, it's specifically the resilient part, so that can support the responsive as well. When you're running the restaurant, are there any specific service targets you are expected to meet? Sure, there are. We have a number of guidelines that we have to follow. For example, around the timing, we are expected to greet a customer within 1 minute or of them coming through the door. After they are seated, they should be greeted by their server within 3 minutes. It should take no more than 5 minutes for them to receive their drinks, and no more than 30 minutes to receive their food. We have people sent from from home office in secret to check our response times, and we get reports showing how we did. So to follow that rule, the responsive is very important because, of course, elastic is a part of the system. The resilient is a part of the system, and the message driven is a kind of the basement of that to fundamental system to support it. So responsive. Tell me what about how orders flow of an order from the front of a house to the kitchen in your restaurant. Our servers go take orders at the table. Usually they write them down, which means because they wrote them down, there is no way to wait or check if the cook or chef got the correct information because they wrote down and then just send it to them, and then you don't need to care about anything anyway, or just to memorize them. They enter them into the system at one of our terminals that causes a paper ticket to be printed out in the kitchen. The cook the cooks grab the paper ticket and then add it to a stack in front of them. Then they prepare things in the order they receive them. Once the meal is prepared, the cook takes it to the window between the kitchen and dining room. After the chef has inspected it, someone calls out to let the servers know their order is ready. They come and pick up the food and then take it to the table. And what is the server doing while the meal is being prepared? They could be doing any number of things. They might take more orders or serve other orders, or they might help clear tables. It all depends on what they have going on at the time. That's the message-driven system. Submit it. There is no doubt. I nailed it. Yes. So I guess this is the last chapter of all the courses, I guess. The major goal of today is to finish. Wait a sec. This is not the. Oh my goodness. I thought it is very small lecture to finish, but actually it was not. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So there are 18, 19 lectures and takes like 2 hours to finish one lecture at the moment. So while I thought I can finish this one very in short time, no, it was not. So I'm gonna add up 20 hours for this. Yes, it takes 20 hours to finish one lesson. 18 hours is not a small number of hours, but that worth it. and then because I have 18 hours. Oh no, what 18 hours? 180 hours is part of consider I spent 3 hours a day, then 3 hours a day, then I can finish one lesson in 1 week, which will cost 8 weeks for finishing all sections. Then maybe I can start the actual um, project in May. That's not bad. That's not bad. Also, it can be a part of English lesson because I'm doing lots of practice to do that. So um, that's very ideal. So so energy. Uh, those are not the 2 hours out of 3 hours per day. To sum up, um, so uh, 3,000 days is required to finish 8 hours, uh, contributing 3 hours per day. That's a lot. Oh, that's unexpected, actually. My God, my kids just make me crazy, make me nuts. But uh, there is no way to cut the corner. So life is not a accomplishment, but the way to go to the goal. So my goal is not actually a goal, but the way of doing things myself is very important. So contributing 3 hours, that's the most important part. So there is no way I can avoided to spend my hours. So 3 hours per day is good enough still. Uh, would it be better to put my screen bigger like this? Wait. Wait. Where's this screen? So this screen. Wait a second. I'm not sure which screen is this. Shall we delete this? Video capture full screen. No, video capture full screen. So this one? Oh, this one. Okay. Now display capture. I don't wanna see the video capture full screen, but for the display capture, we need to extend this one a little bit more. So at least it can be easily shown to the user. Okay. Oh my god. So this part was the audio input. And oh, I should reduce this in order to oh my god, everything is recorded. Oh, take a break. Let's finish. Six, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Oh. Wow. Okay, I will just stop it for now and then take a break around 20 minutes and then we'll come back.